This month we're going to do a little bit about writing. Tonight we're going to talk about doing research for historical novels and that sort of thing. A friend of mine from our local writers group, Christy Nicholas, has had books published on, well, she'll tell you about it. It's about the history of old Ireland. So drinking beer is acceptable and that sort of thing.
Especially if it's Guinness.
Especially if it's the dark stuff. Okay. Christy, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron. Hello, everyone. Well, today is Talk Like a Pirate Day, but I figured that might make the speech a little more difficult to understand, so I'm going to forego that particular type of quasi-historical fun. I'm Christy Nicholas, as Ron said. I'm an author. I have published 2 travel guides, 6 novels. I've got 2 more written and ready to publish, and I've just written 14,000 words into my next novel in the last 2 weeks. Most of my novels are historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy. Most of them are set in Ireland, though one ventures a little bit into Scotland. And they've been set in the 19th, 18th, 12th, and 11th centuries so far. I'm heading toward the 6th and 5th century in my next 3. I'm all planned out.
And you also make jewelry.
And I make jewelry.
That's why I recognize you.
Yes. I make
beaded jewelry.
tiny seed beads. I sew each bead on one by one with needle and thread because I am that insane. So detail-oriented is something I definitely am. My career is actually as an accountant. I work for Corning in external reporting, so I'm used to dealing with spreadsheets and numbers and precise figures on a regular basis. Now, when I was younger, I really loved reading everything. I read the encyclopedia, I read the dictionary, I grew up on science fiction and fantasy. My mom used to tell me Tolkien tales as bedtime stories. So a lot of, especially epic fantasy, is set in medieval or quasi-medieval settings. Castles and dragons and princesses that need rescuing. As I got older, I started looking more to the future as, stopped looking towards the future in science fiction and started looking more into the past and fantasy stuff. And then I started getting into historical fiction. I started getting into books like from Bernard Cornwell or from Elizabeth Chadwick or Sharon K. Penman, ones that dealt with historical people, events, and instead of just the settings. And I started realizing that there are a lot of books and movies out there, Braveheart, that don't have a lot of reliance upon the truth.
Braveheart?
Braveheart.
Yeah, okay.
That's Celts were not born in the 12th century, in the 13th century. And the young woman that he supposedly had an affair with was, I think, 8 at the time in reality. So that wouldn't have happened. One would hope. So I kind of synthesized historical fiction into 3 main categories. There are books that are written with historical characters as the main characters. And like I said, Sharon K. Penman, Elizabeth Chadwick, books like The Other Boleyn Girl, those are all written about people that we have heard about. Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, William the Conqueror, William Marshall. Those are the main characters of the books. Those probably require the highest level of historical accuracy. Because if you're writing about a historical person and you give them a completely different personality from what's recorded from him, you're going to have your fans up in arms. The second type is where you've got historic events as the background, but your characters themselves are fictional. Some examples of this are Alexandre Dumas with The Three Musketeers, or Ken Follett with Pillars of the Earth. These are set in historical times, like 12th century Pillars of the Earth, the building of the cathedral, but all the main characters are completely fictional. You can give them whatever personality, motivations, flaws, and virtues that you want, and nobody's going to get really upset because you've demeaned some important person's name. The third type I want to call historical fantasy / alternate worlds history, where you've got something like, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Chronicles of St. Cainber by Catherine Kurtz. It's historical fantasy set in something that's mostly medieval Wales with a church hierarchy, but the church does magic and they won't allow anybody else to do it.
Oh, that's nothing new about that.
But they do real magic. Well, demonstrable magic, I should say. Another example would be Diana Gabaldon, who writes the Outlander books. There's time travel, but she does incredibly good research about what Scottish military history was at the time, or what their outfits were, or what they used to fix the dye when they're dyeing wool. Which is not something that I'm going to discuss while you're eating. These three different sections, I guess, of historical fiction are going to require a different attention to detail. But in the end, you still want to get as much accuracy as possible so your readers aren't thrown out of the story. You're reading along and you realize, hey, wait a minute. William Marshall wasn't born yet. He shouldn't be in charge of that group of soldiers. It's going to pull you out and suspend your disbelief. Or you cannot suspend your disbelief. There we go. However, there's also a conflict between the authenticity of your books and the readability for modern readers. For instance, I'm writing in 12th century Ireland. If I were actually writing what they were saying in 12th century Ireland, nobody here would be able to read it. Very few scholars around the world would actually be able to read it, and I certainly wouldn't be able to write it because I am not fluent in pre-Norman Gaelic languages, nor post-Norman Gaelic languages for that matter, though I can do a basic Irish conversation. So you're going to have to translate that into modern English, which means that you're going to have idiom, and you're going to have phrases that may or may not ring true for the century that you're trying to write in. And it's a very fine line to walk in order to try to get that balance. Something as simple as, excuse me, a name. For instance, a typical name in 12th century Ireland was, let's see if I can pronounce this correctly, Murchatagu Conqueror, which is spelled Murchataguaconchobair. Now, the typical American reader is going to look at that and say, oh, the M word, the M guy, and just gloss right over it. However, I could anglicize that into the more commonly recognizable name, Murtagh O'Connor. Now, it's anglicized, which means it's not authentic, but it's readable to modern audiences. So there's got to be a compromise sometimes between that authenticity and the readability. There are a lot of words that are used in the past that aren't used in the same way in the present. The word nice used to mean silly, foolish, or simple. Awful meant worthy of awe. So did awesome, but that's a different word. A wench was originally a female child. That became a female servant, and now it becomes a wanton woman. Thank you, pirates. Talk like a pirate tag. To be naughty meant you had naught. You had nothing. You were poor. Meat meant solid food of any kind, not just animal flesh. You know, we supped on meat and drink. That meant food and drink. It didn't mean necessarily beef or lamb or anything like that. So we might write a word that is authentic in our language, in our dialogue, in our descriptions, but unless the modern reader realizes that this means something different, it's not going to come across the way you mean it. Now, what I tend to do when I'm writing is put in a few words or phrases that sound ancient or sound old time or sound particularly Irish or a turn of phrase. And it gives just the hint of a different time and a different place without going overboard. There is an author that I've read or attempted to read named Dorothy Dunnett. Has any of you read any of the Dorothy Dunnett books? She's strong medicine. She writes in 16th century Scotland, and she is a scholar of 16th century Scottish history. And that's wonderful, and she has great characters, but unfortunately her research shows. She has her characters in dialogue say different poems and phrases in other languages like Old French or Old Scots or Gaelic that aren't readily found on the internet, and she wrote these in the 80s. And then doesn't offer any kind of contextual meaning to what those words or phrases meant.
It's not translated.
It's not translated, there's no index, there's no appendix, and there's no context. And that drove me nuts, because I'm the kind of person that will stop and look it up. Whether it's a word I've never come across or a phrase I don't know, I want to find out what I'm reading. And after doing that 3 times in the first 3 chapters, I was done. I did finish the book, and I came away completely and totally unsatisfied.
It's a way of reminding you that you are a historic tourist.
Yeah, exactly. And you really want to understand what's being written. And Dorothy Dunnett wrote to herself, but not so much to a modern audience. And there are rabid fans of Dorothy Dunnett, and I understand that. She's a very popular author, or was, she's passed away since. But I think that a simple appendix would have been so much more helpful. Now, in my books, I include an appendix in the back with pronunciations of all my Irish words and names, and I try to use them sparingly and define them as with context in the text itself. So if I tell you that he went into the Tuath, or it went into the Tuath works, it's a particular area that a king holds sway over in the Ireland, like a county. Or if they, of course I can't think of any word right now off the top of my head. There are other ways that you can add authenticity to your writing. One of my favorites is to add songs or poems of the time, or quotes from verses, Bible, etc. I use a lot of time to actually find songs and poems that existed at the time, which as you get farther back, it's really difficult because there aren't a lot of secular songs recorded in say 16th century anything. I actually have a book on the table somewhere around here that's Irish poems of some sort. Oh, medieval Irish lyrics. I bought this specifically because I like including them and I wanted to actually have a reliable source. By the way, all the books that I brought are different books that I've purchased as part of my research. You're welcome to flip through them and hand them around. There is a great danger whenever you're writing something historic to unintentionally include anachronisms. And that's true of objects as well as phrases or words. Not only can you include real anachronisms, but you can use perceived anachronisms and not realize it. For instance, I had a sex scene that used the word member. And one of my reading group pointed out, hey, I don't think that word was used back then. So I looked it up. It's been in use since the 12th century. So it is not an anachronism, but if somebody perceives it as such, it may pull them out of the story. So there's hundreds of words for that. I can use it.
Which word? What does that apply to? Remember?
A particular male body part. Yes.
Johnson.
Shakespeare called it a tool.
Yes. And there's actually a website I found that has a list of words used for sex and all the things that go along with sex in a timeline. by year as to when they first got recorded. And it's pretty much accepted that if it was recorded in the 13th century, it was probably in use in the 12th. It just didn't get recorded until the 13th. So you got at least 100 years leeway. A little more if you want to push it. There's a great resource called Etym Online, for etymology, that will tell you the source of a word, sometimes the phrase associated with the word, when and where it was first recorded, what year it came from, and maybe even what, like if it was Old French, 15th century. And it was used for this here, and then this phrase came into use in the 16th century, and then this one not until the 19th century. And I've fallen down that rabbit hole and used many hours playing with that website.
What's it called?
Yeah, etymonline.com.
Etymonline.
Yep, like etymology, but online. Now, one of the other bugaboos that I have is profanity in historical writing. Modern profanity tends to center around bodily functions. Bodily functions in medieval times were everyday things, so profanity did not center around it. In medieval times, profanity tended to center around religious topics, blasphemy. If you said, bloody hell, you were referring to God's wounds on the cross, Christ's wounds on the cross, the bloodiness. And by saying that, you were actually wishing that upon God's corporeal body in this world. And therefore, that was a serious blasphemy. The same thing with zounds, as Shakespeare has mentioned before, that word. That's short for God's wounds. So yeah, that was a very severe blasphemic exclamation. What especially the Gaels used to do, instead of blaspheme, they would come up with creative curses that didn't involve bad words. They didn't really have bad words that other than blasphemy. So they'd say something like, may the cat eat your body and the devil eat your cat. Or pismires and spiders, or just something colorful and decorative that showed their anger or their surprise or their rage. And it becomes a challenge to find examples of these phrases to use. I try to give one character a favorite phrase, and it's difficult to find them. I bought a half a dozen books on ancient cursing. By the way, just in case you are interested, both the F word and the S word are from Germanic roots and date from before the 15th century. Oh, here's another Gaelic curse I came across. May you all go to hell and not have a drop of porter to quench your eternal thirst. Now, resources themselves. There are lots of resources out there in this information age of ours. The difficulty is not in finding them. The difficulty is in finding good ones, authentic ones, reliable ones. There is a lot of crap on the internet. And that's true whether you're researching historical novels or you're researching political views or whatever you're researching. There's a lot of unreliable things out there. So some of the other places that I find things are scholarly articles are the best for me to find, or an actual interview with an expert on the subject. That latter is more difficult to find. But I've started making friends with people at the University of Dublin in the Antiquities department, just out of self-preservation. But there are some great resources available in academic texts. JSTOR.com, I think it is. I'm not sure if it's .org or .com, but JSTOR is a wonderful resource of academic journals, and if you're a student or a teacher or know one, you should have access to it. I think you can get access through the library as well, but I'm not certain about that. Academia.edu is another resource. So these are articles that people have written, experts in their field, historians, writers, archaeologists, that have published their books to these websites, but they're not available for public consumption. But you can search these websites and find some wonderful things. I spent 3 hours last night reading a treatise on the comparison of women's rights in marriage between ancient Irish Brehon law and canonical law of the church. Because I am a nerd. Other things, there's the Gutenberg Project. Is anybody familiar with that? Where they have transcribed thousands and thousands of historical texts online and are free to see and use. Another resource is books on Amazon or at used bookstores. Unfortunately with that, the downside is you may be looking for one factoid. And so you're going to buy what might be a $40 scholarly book for one factoid. And you don't know for certain if it's in there. So I tend to get things from the used bookstore sales, or the used book sales, because I can flip through and see, oh, is this going to be of value to my continuing research? And that's what most of these are. Others have been recommended to me by other people in the same situation. People that want good, reliable scholarly works that apply to what you're working on. Let's see. Some of the things that I've had to research while I've been writing my books, where I've said, I'm writing, but I have to stop and research this right away. What flower grew in April in Ireland that is native and can poison someone? And that they knew that it could poison someone. What are the details of a pre-Roman Irish funeral? What's a typical dinner in 5th century Ireland, or dinner, or breakfast? Did adults drink milk on a regular basis? And the answer is most of Europe no, but in Ireland, fermented milk, yes. Who knew? Clothing and costume detail. Again, don't be a Braveheart. Women did not wear dresses in 12th century Ireland. They wore what's called a lenya, which is a long tunic that came down to just above the knees, while men wore a lenya down below their knees, full belted. So it's like an over tunic. I typically...
Oh, did they wear leggings or something under the, it just came to the
Nope.
knees?
They did wear thick socks in the winter. But if you've ever been in Ireland in the summer when it's raining, that's not sufficient. Now, I am a planner when it comes to writing, which means I plan out a 3-page synopsis and my scene list all before I start writing. Other people are pantsers, where they'll just write a scene and a scene and a scene and a scene and connect them all together. Because I'm a planner, I like to do a lot of research ahead of time. I'd like to set my story in a place that has some sort of conflict. So I search the Annals of Ireland, which are mostly available online, and find a nice good war, or a political coup, or a shift in beliefs, or a plague, or an invasion, or something that offers a really good background for that offers a lot of opportunity for conflict. So you'll have, the Ostmen, the Vikings, invading a place just at the same time that the Normans are invading a place, and boom, you're in 1177 Ulster. And that's where I set the novel that I've got coming out in January. Right now I'm writing a novel set in Clonmacnoise in 1055, where 3 abbots died within 3 years of each other. Something was going on. Whether it was political intrigue or plague, the annals do not actually record. So I haven't yet decided which I'm going to use. Yes?
How do you build up to the intrigue? Like, how do you make it, so we're on the edge of our seats? What goes through your head when you're writing those passages?
Tension is the main thing. And for tension, you need conflict. But you don't want to do it all at once. You want to build up to it. So you're going to have a small conflict, and then a larger conflict. And even better if the subsequent conflicts are caused by the main character's attempt to fix the first conflicts.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, okay, I gotta fix this. Oh, shoot, I made things worse. Well, I gotta fix this then. Oops.
Sounds familiar. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. Harry Potter is a great example of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Now, as I said, I first try to get a place and a conflict. I try to start making personalities. I usually try to find somebody I know or a character that I know for part of the personality traits. For instance, I have a friend who's an incredibly sarcastic and bitter person. So I aged her to age 65 and made her an advisor to the king, who doesn't take crap from anybody. And I also kind of wanted a 65-year-old grandmother to save the world as opposed to the 18-year-old wunderkind. I thought it was a time for a change. I try to give each of my characters some flaws as well as some virtues, including my antagonists. I don't believe a believable antagonist can have no virtues. I mean, even Hitler could draw. Not a great virtue. I don't want to give him a great virtue, but every human is three-dimensional, and your character should be too, in order to be more believable. Names is usually my next stop. Now, as I mentioned earlier, ancient Irish names can be incredibly difficult to pronounce, to keep in your head, but at the same time, anglicizing them by its very nature, because England was in charge of Ireland for 900 years in a very, very bitter occupation, anglicizing them is almost insulting. There are many Irish today that are reverting their name spellings to the old Irish spellings, now that they're allowed to. So you've got a lot of Orla's spelled O-R-L-A-G-H as opposed to O-R-L-A, or Neaves with N-I-A-M-H. So names are difficult. I start going through all the annals of Ireland and picking out names that are relatively easy for Americans to pronounce, but still have an Irish flavor, and that I haven't used before, which is getting more and more difficult. It helps that some Irish names are becoming more popular, like Saoirse is becoming popular because there's an actress named Saoirse Ronan who's done a couple, like My Lovely Bones and a couple other movies. So it's becoming more popular, at least more recognizable as a name. Once you get your people, what kind of lives have they led? You have to give them a history, and that history has to be appropriate to the time, unless you're writing time travel, which is a different subject. So if you've got, for instance, my advisor to the king, she's a prophetess, she's a seer. In 12th century Ireland, this was possible. She was also cousin to the king, which means she had some protected status. However, the bishop still hated her, thought she was a witch, and wanted to get rid of her. But he was a new bishop, so he didn't have a lot of power in the area yet. So you've got conflict, and you've got a believable backstory. If you do give a person a particular job, it should be a realistic one. Ruling queens in medieval times did happen, but they were unusual, and all of them are known. So again, if you're going to give somebody, for instance, make somebody a pirate queen, sure, it happened. Grania O'Malley was a pirate queen in the 16th century. She had a whole fleet of ships, and she terrorized the Western Ireland shore, and even got to meet Queen Elizabeth at one point. That happened once. And then there was another in America, something Anne. I can't remember her name. But yeah, female pirates were not common. So if you're going to give them an unusual job, you have to make it believable. So once I have my people, my place, my conflict, my setting, oops, more research, gotta research my setting, then I can actually start planning my story out. I can plan out my plots, my subplots, my themes. Some of the characters will start cropping up here. Oh, does this person have a best friend? Or maybe a grandchild? Or do they have somebody that they fought with all their lives? Or is this person somebody who's a wanderer, and when things get rough, they start moving on, and therefore they may come across an ex or something along the way and make more trouble for them. So you have to start thinking about things and the way people lived at this time in order to flesh out your stories. You have to think about things like, if you're going to make your character divorced, could they be divorced in 12th century canon law? How about Gaelic law? Which one would hold sway at that time? Did they use beeswax candles? What did they sit on? Benches, stools, chairs? These are all details that if you're going to create a visual feast within your book by your descriptions, you need to add the details that will be authentic for that particular scene. So even after doing all this research, and I'll spend a couple of weeks doing research and then write and stop 3 times an hour to do more research. Even after that, I'll write my first draft, read it to my reading group, and they'll still come up with, did they really call it that then? It's never going to be perfect. Even after you publish and it's gone through 3 editors and a proofreader, it's still not going to be perfect. But you're going to get it as perfect as you can. And I think that attention to detail is one of the things that helps make a writer a well-read writer, as opposed to a, oh, that was self-published writer. Whether you're self-published or not, you get that, oh, really, this went through an editor feeling sometimes. It's really, especially for somebody who's obsessive like me, this kind of juggling act is almost a nightmare. But at the same time, it's thrilling because it's a challenge. I'm a puzzle solver. I like doing tax returns because they're puzzles. Yes, I know I'm strange. To me, crafting the best story I can out of the resources and constraints available to me is like forming a puzzle, solving a puzzle. And to me, that's a thrill. And it gives me an incredible sense of accomplishment once it's done. Any questions?
Have you ever used genealogical research, say, starting with someone, maybe in America even, and tracing them back and using them as a character?
That's exactly what I did on my first novel. Well, my first novel was actually contemporary romance based on my parents' love story.
Oh.
My first historical fiction novel was based on a made-up story of one of my ancestors. I based her in Ohio, which is where my family was from, Alliance, Ohio. I described the scenes and everything in the first draft, which got cut. Gave them my family names, all sorts of things from my genealogical research at the time. Because my family had been there for 200 years. So I wanted to add the Mackenzies and the Dohertys and all the research that I had done. I wanted to create that. I have also picked out first names from my genealogical research. Yes?
I just want to talk about a few things that have helped me in research I'm doing for my novel. But a lot of it has to do with libraries. We are in an area with a lot of small towns and a lot of small town libraries, but most libraries these days are in a network of other regional libraries. And if your local library doesn't have a book you want, the next one over the network might.
And there can be interlibrary loans as well, especially with the New York State Library system.
A few days, you can put in your request, and the book will be sent to your local library, and you can check it out through them. Another thing I've gotten a lot of mileage out of recently is college libraries often have community borrowing cards. I've been using SUNY Geneseo both as a writing nook and a research trove.
And a lot of times you'll have scholarly works available there that were thesis or master's projects that aren't available anywhere else.
Or just in general, works that are more scholarly bent than your local libraries might focus on more popular stuff.
I would probably give my left arm to spend a year at the University College in Dublin, just playing in Trinity College Library.
The college I'm an alumni of is supposed to have alumni access to JSTOR. I emailed them and they never heard back, so I got to try again.
Keep emailing them. JSTOR is a great resource.
Yes. And also one of the points when evaluating books, and you want to pay attention to when it's been written. If you're dealing with, for example, African American or other, what in this country we'd say minorities, you might want to especially look at the date if it was set before scholarship started to take those people seriously.
Yep. There are several scholarly works I've come across from the 1930s and 40s about Irish prehistory that had some horribly wrong views of things. That recent discoveries, archaeological evidence, and translations of ancient texts have since proven to be false.
And there's also a lot of new scholarship around medieval times that's, challenge our Victorian and based notions of how society was.
Even such things as simple as finding Richard III's skeleton changed history as historians knew it. All of a sudden they had DNA evidence of who Richard III was and what his hunch actually is like. A lot of people maintain that the horrible reputation of Richard III was due to the fact that Shakespeare was writing for his successive empire, the dynasty. So they gave him bad press because they were the old rule. So, it was exactly fake news. And there's actually a lot of evidence to support the idea that Richard III was well loved by his home counties of York and was actually a decent ruler and maybe even a decent man. But yeah, he got a total smear campaign afterwards.
I just have, I think, something that would be good to share, that when a story is there to be written, I try to start where the story started. For instance, everybody knows where Hornby is, right? I had a dream about a woman ghost in a blue dress around Hornby Lake, Cinnamon Lake. So I, what if I have these kind of dreams? So what I did was, there's this little Hornby Museum. Are you familiar with that? So one Sunday afternoon, because they're only open 2 hours on a Sunday in the summer, I went in there, and there was lots of information, not about particularly anything that was historical and that it was provable, but I did find an article about a woman who went to a girls' finishing school in Geneva and was taking the train home back to Corning, back when we had trains between all these places. And she lived in Hornby, but she got on the train in Geneva and did not get off at her stop. And she ended up in New York City and purchased a gun and committed suicide. That's
a story right there.
And what they wrote, how they wrote in the newspapers, and this was a Geneva newspaper, which I don't think even exists now, but there's that article sitting in the museum. So just in your own little town, stop and read a plaque. There's good research everywhere.
Yeah. I came across a story of one of my ancestresses. Her name was Margaret Matson, and her husband Niels Matson lived in the late 1600s in Pennsylvania. They had just recently emigrated from Sweden. He was Finnish, she was Swedish. And she was accused of being a witch by her neighbor because the cattle were dying. And she was one of, I think, 3 other defendants. I actually have a transcript of the trial that I got. And it was the last witch trial in Pennsylvania. It was presided over by William Penn Jr., his father of whom Pennsylvania was named for. And she was acquitted of being a witch, but convicted of being known as a witch. So she was fined 50 pounds and 5 years probation. And that's a story that I need to write someday.
Wow.
You know the adage that I'm descended from the witch you didn't burn? That's true.
I take it that meant like she acted in a way that was scandalous.
Evidently, they didn't really give any explanation to it. But yeah, it was a scapegoat, quite literally, yeah. And they were recent immigrants, so they weren't liked by the locals. It was a farming community, very small, so you know how people get in small communities. So yeah, they probably moved away after that.
So I wonder what would have been going on at the time that people would be concerned about the contribution of a witch to
Well, in
what had been happening.
1690, it wasn't all that far after the Salem. I mean, it was still a living memory with the Salem witch trials. So I can't imagine that hysteria was that difficult to foment if you wanted to cause trouble for a neighbor. Especially a foreign neighbor, somebody who's moved very
Particularly
recently.
if it's a crime to be known as a witch.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you all heard that they recently discovered that the whole mania around the Salem witch trial may have been the fault of a fungus, ergo, in the grain that caused hallucinations. Because it had been a particularly wet year and the grain had molded a little bit, and that may have caused hallucinations in the girls and caused hysteria.
I was going to add that may have been the cause of the cattle dying that she was blamed.
Could very well have been,
Or-
yeah.
Oh, in Georgia.
I used to be a cow.
But you got better. Turned me into a newt. Any other questions?
Have you read Hilary Mantel's books, Wolf Hall and Breaking the
I've
Bodies?
seen Wolf Hall, and I have that on my
I just
Goodreads
was
to be
curious about
read.
your,
I love
your
Wolf Hall.
interpretation.
Yeah, I really love Wolf
Not
Hall.
interpretation, your, whether she,
For those that don't know,
Was
that's
using correct information.
during Henry VIII's time, and Thomas Cromwell, yeah, Oliver, no, Thomas Cromwell.
Thomas Cromwell.
Sometimes I mix up my Cromwells. I'm a
Shame on
Cromwell
you.
historian. They're completely different Cromwells. The Irish really don't like Oliver. They still cannot put a statue of Oliver Cromwell in Dublin, by the way, because it gets destroyed every time they try.
Uh-huh.
And that's 17th century that was.
Just like here.
Yeah.
Well, the
Does
British are
anybody-
really not nice to the Irish.
Has anybody been to Madame Tussauds in London? You know that they had to put plexiglass over the Hitler waxwork because people kept defacing it. No, granted, that's much more recent.
Yeah.
You really, if you haven't watched, we were just talking about Hitler. And it's just like, if you haven't seen the videos from the time, him giving speeches in front of hundreds of thousands of Germans and being cheered and loved. And
He was
cried when he
charismatic.
died, man.
Yeah.
Women loved him, they took
Oh, yeah.
fleurs.
I always wondered, in an alternate history mindset, I always wondered what would have happened if he had actually been accepted into the Vienna School of Architecture. Because it was his rejection that they believe reinforced his need to build something called the Third Reich.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, when you have hidden three types, there is that sort of what if type.
Yep, that's
Yeah, it's a
that
fourth type,
alternate
really.
world, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I read a book a long time ago, and I don't even remember what it was called, but it was a series of short stories. One of them was, what if Einstein had never left Germany? Or what if Genghis Khan had been Christian? Or what if the Black Plague had not killed off most of Europe? You know, just one little question can open up an entire realm of possibilities and the consequences of those possibilities to modern life.
Could be another novel.
Could be many other novels.
It could even be more fanciful ones, like what if the Napoleonic Wars were fought with dragons?
Temeraire by Naomi Novak, one of my favorite series.
I like what was Ahab's wife doing while he was looking for Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Did you read Ahab's wife?
I haven't.
I
I haven't even heard
It's
of
a
that
great
one. That's
story.
wonderful.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that
Ahab's
out.
wife. And another one that's in that same direction is Scarlet. Where did
I've read that
Scarlet
one.
go after Gone with the Wind?
Mhm.
She went back to Ireland, apparently.
Apparently.
This is
To the real
historical
Tara?
fiction.
To the real Tara?
Historical fan fiction.
No, not, you read the book. It's a good book, good read.
There
So when
is.
do you have time to write? And
I'm a ninja writer. I write early in the morning when no one else is awake.
which is like 5 in the morning?
I get